Welcome back to the show. Today we have Dr. Alessandra Wall on the show, and she's a former clinical psychologist who has spent the last decade working to figure out how to bridge the gap for women in senior executive roles. She founded her company Noteworthy, an exclusive executive coaching firm to support powerful executive women in finance and STEM and get them from VP to VP or to C-suite. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you being on the show. Oh, no, it's from VP to C-suite.
Yep.
I did read that wrong. Sorry, everybody. It's from VP to C-suite. So thank you. I appreciate you being on the show.
I can't wait for our conversation today.
So don't forget, for our audience, if you're looking to build a thriving freelance business using those corporate skills you already have, you can use the code podcast, grab my corporate to contract course, and you get $100 off. So make sure to check it out on the bottom of the show notes. So Alessandra, let's just jump right in. I love asking people, if you could tell yourself one thing when you started on your entrepreneurial journey, what would it be?
To make life easier, I would have hired a coach sooner. To me, it is without a doubt the number one. I think number two would have been to commit a little bit stronger sooner.
I heard that recently from someone else. She said she wished she had gone further, faster, or something like that. It was along those lines from one of my guests. Now, why do you think this commitment is so important when you first start out?
Well, for me personally, so as you mentioned, I'm a former clinical psychologist. So I started my coaching business while still running my therapy practice. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm a cautious, not everybody, like some people will dump everything and go into their dreams. It's a personality type. You have to just decide. Even if I'd had that personality type, that would have probably ended my marriage. So that was not going to happen. But I spent many, many years within the back of my mind this thought, if this fails, I can just go back to just being, and the justs were all there, just go back to just being a psychologist. And that's hedging. And that hedging, the psychologist in me knows that hedging keeps you playing small. And I just needed to really, probably what I should have done is take a 6-month, 1-year sabbatical and then said, okay, what if I'm all in instead of being all in, but exhausted after hours doing this?
Okay. So this is, I do want to actually talk a little bit more about this, because that's what I did when I started my freelance business. Is I worked full time. There's no way we could have afforded me to take any time off, my husband and I. So I did it and built it until they got to the point where they were rivaling each other. And even though I was making less in my freelance business, I decided to quit anyway. And because it was making enough, we'll say this. I was making less, but it was making enough. So then I could jump forward in that. But I never looked at it as like hedging almost. But I did often say, well, if this doesn't work, I'll just go back to my full-time job. I always have my full-time job. That's fine. If it doesn't work, that's fine. And it did work.
Right.
So how do you think that's holding and limiting? Because I didn't feel like it to me. It felt like a safety net that was freeing. I know that.
I know you talk about mindset with your clients a lot. So for me, it's a mindset thing. I definitely personally come from a background where I had ADHD growing up. I didn't know I did. I had to work really, really, really hard to be an average student. I got myself through everything, right? Eventually you learn how to do what you need to do. In 50% of cases with ADHD, the brain actually eventually catches up and the symptoms aren't there in adulthood. But I came in with, I guess now what we would call imposter syndrome, imposter complex of some kind. Because in the back of my mind, there was this, if you fail, just even that, if you fail, I was walking into building something, but not picturing it as truly 100% being successful. I played small. I gave in to fears. I was much more likely to give in to fears. I spent a lot of time, but I don't know about you, but my favorite procrastination process, which I don't now when I see I can recognize, or fear response, is to be productive, doing things I don't need to do. So I, for example, got my first website built And then I had 8 different iterations of that website. I tweaked, I could code in HTML. By the end, I knew the hex numbers for all the colors I use. I would just tweak, 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 tweak. And because it was busy, I'd feel like I was moving somewhere, but I wasn't building my business.
Mm.
I wasn't even building operations that would really drive my business, which is just as important as kind of creating a strong pipeline. That's the issue, is I let fear define how I approached my work, how I approached my business, as opposed to now. And it's not just because I'm successful. It's because I had to make this shift. At some point, I was like, if I fail, I fail, but that's not like, that doesn't matter. I'll just start again. And I was able to do that among other things because I did fail. I did burn myself out about 4 years into the first iteration of this coaching business. I had burnt myself out. I mean, truly burnt out.
What does that mean? Truly burnt out? Like you can't even get up from bed? Like,
well, no, that's to me, that's entering like nearly depression. So I wasn't there yet, but I had exhausted myself. I was producing multiple Instagram or Facebook posts a week. I was producing videos. I was running a podcast. I know how much work this is to have a podcast and guests. I was creating the articles that went with the podcast. I was raising 2 young children. I still had my therapy practice. I got to a point where I didn't produce content for 2 years after being burnt out because I'm like, I just can't. And I had so much content that I was not leveraging properly. And I was working so hard. And my best year, my profit was $18,000. So I was dumping it, and it probably wasn't really full profit because in order to make those $18,000, there's a lot of money that didn't go out of my therapy practice into my family.
yes. Yeah.
I stopped paying for my retirement. I stopped adding to my retirement, all these things that I did. And there came a point where I was like, I just can't, I'm going to close shop and I have to decide what I want to do. And I took 6 months off. From that, I continued operating as a therapist. And I went back and looked at what was fun? Let's just start there. Who are the people you had a lot of fun working with? How do you leverage what you know how to do really well, what you have on the table? And where can I do this so I can build impact without having to work so hard? And that's when I started looking at the corporate space. And that's when I started also looking at working very specifically with women in leadership. And that was fun for me, working on.
So what were you doing prior then that was
coaching.
burning you out? Oh, just life coaching. Okay.
Life coaching, right? Okay. The natural extension of being a therapist. Take all those things with being a therapist. The life coaching for me was an opportunity to take that skill set and to apply it to people who are ready to move into action. The example I always gave people, and if somebody's listening to this is what my hands are doing as opposed to watching it. But when you work with a therapist, if you have somebody at baseline, got this line, people are functioning under baseline in therapy, and they come to the therapist, and the therapist is supposed to bring them up to baseline. And the end of therapy, you usually help them move beyond their previous baseline a little bit. So there's some coaching as part of therapy. But when you're working in coaching, you've got people at their baseline and you're trying to get them way above baseline. They're poised to take action. They're ready to do stuff. So life coaching sounded really aligned with what I knew how to do, exciting to be at that place where it wasn't pulling people to get out of bed in the morning or take a shower, right? Or getting them to overcome daily panic attacks. We were going to build great things. It was exhausting.
Yeah.
Sometimes I still wonder how life coaches do it because, there's so much competition out there. The average individual might need the help, but might not always realize that what that help looks like. And many people struggle to invest in themselves. I mean, I work with women, so women really struggle to invest in themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think life coaching too is, I don't know, I've never gotten life coaching, so I can't really speak to it, but it always seems like a nice to have. So I feel like pulling money to say it bluntly, like getting the money from them and validating your fee and showing the value in it is just, you got so much more of a hurdle, right? I think with life coaching, from what I understand.
It is.
Yeah.
I mean, again, as an executive coach and as an executive coach who works very specifically with women, I think getting women to invest in themselves is always pulling teeth.
Mm.
I don't know about you with your clients, but I know that I will talk to women who are, they're super successful. That is not the question, but they are burnt out or tired, or they've had to compromise so much of who they are to build the kind of success that they have. And they'll tell you that, and then they'll talk to you about what they want. And our job as coaches is to determine, is that possible? What's the route to get them there? What are going to be their hurdles? And still, like, when they hear the fees, there's this, I have to remind women, I'm like, if you were spending this on a vacation, something that's going to be fleeting for your family, you'd have no questions about this. If this were a camp for one of your kids, like I don't know, a sports camp for one of your kids, you'd have no issue with it. Shoot, some of you have handbags that are worth more than what I charge. I mean, they're the nice, the Kelly, the Birkin, the whatever, but still, we're talking about your life. It's a long, in business, it's a long sales cycle. It's just part of working with women. I know people who've chosen not to work with women because of that.
Yeah. So you took that break. Mm-hmm. You said, I like working with, career women specifically. Now, let's talk a little bit about Noteworthy, right? Your business that you started. Can you tell me, what do you think is the biggest issue right now in the workplace when trying to get women into these C-suite roles?
The biggest issue?
Not money, not getting women to invest in themselves. Yes.
The biggest issue right now is that humanity as a whole isn't really socialized to see women in these positions. Like if I start telling you a story and I say, well, I met with the CEO of a company, and I just say they the whole time, I guarantee in your head, you're picturing a man. And
oh yeah, I have like this older white male in my head. Yep.
We love older white males. You and I, we probably have older white males in our lives. Yes, it's not that we have anything against them. It just is like who we picture. And because of that, and this is where my background as a psychologist becomes very useful, because I have a really good understanding of how the human brain works. Like, we're going to respect, pay attention to, support, elevate people who fit what we think should be the prototype for something. So when people are hiring, among other things, and they're thinking, oh, we need to find our next CEO, we need to find our next VP, even, I always say, I don't think people are, the vast majority of people are maliciously trying to hold women back. I just think that's not who they picture leading. And it goes all the way to the beginning. So that's not who they're promoting earlier on. That's not who they're thinking of bringing in. Women are socialized to not self-promote. Actually, just using that sentence, I should never use that sentence, because when I use it that way, women are like, this is so gross. But like, women are socialized not to talk about themselves. And visibility is the number one factor associated with advancement for women. So if women don't learn how to walk into a room and say, I can handle that. I'm actually really good at this. This is something I've done before. Ooh, I was able to achieve this. If they can't do that, they're not going to be visible. If they're not visible, nobody's going to think of promoting them over John here, who is my prototype of what my next VP or C-suite leader should be like. And plus, John talks about what he can do a little more easily. It's not that men love that. They're just taught to do. I mean, I have two boys. They naturally do it. It's not like I've taught them to not be humble. Just walk in, they're like, I've played one game of volleyball. I am the best volleyball player out there. Let me tell you about the 3 things I did last game that made me amazing. It's just
so interesting. I read a statistic. Somewhere once that talked about how when I wish I could remember where it's from, but it was like when women see a job opening and they see all the requirements and they see like, they think, oh, I can't do 70% of these things. So I'm not going to apply. Whereas men look at this job opening and they say, like, oh, I can do 30% of this. Okay, great. I'm going to apply anyway. And
So
it's like,
it's
so women like just lose out on these job opportunities because they don't even want to put themselves out there because like, I can't do every single thing, which made me want to talk a little bit about perfectionism because I know you work with a lot of women, especially people who are very highly motivated and ambitious, probably like myself. We love, even yourself with your webpage, tweaking it all the time. You want it to be perfect. How does perfectionism hold women back in any career?
yeah. So just to go back, it's a Hewlett Packard study. It's
Oh, you know it.
yeah, and the number is 60%.
60. Okay.
Men see a job and they're like, I can do 60% of this. I'm good. I got the other 40. I love you, gentlemen. If you happen to be listening to this, love you for doing that. That is what potential is. That is what growth, that's how you build growth. You're like, that is self-confidence. I trust myself to have the capacity to learn and figure it out, or find people who will help me learn and figure it out.
Mm.
This is what we want women to do. If women don't check all the boxes, it's not even if they check only 30%. Literally, if they don't check all the boxes, they tend to shy away from applying for these jobs. And the problem with that is then a woman's career is much more flat because she's moving into roles where she's like not learning,
Lateral.
growing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So perfectionism. Oh, when I was a psychologist, my area of expertise and specialty was anxiety, perfectionism, and actually working with the kind of women I work now, and former mostly reformed perfectionist right here.
Is that okay? So I have one of my best friends is a psychologist, and she says it's a big no-no to work in your field when you suffer the same thing. Is
Yeah,
that true?
I think all therapists are working in their field when they say.
Yeah, well, she definitely is. But
I
she was
don't
like, when
know.
she told me, she was like, you can't tell my other friends because or my other colleagues. I was like, why would I tell them? But
They
yeah.
all of us do. I would argue that it's the contrary because I was intimately aware of how true perfectionism can really break you apart. I had such a better understanding for what my patients were going through. Where it can become a no-no is simply if you can't make the distinction between your own experience and their experience. I'd like to think I'm imperfect. So I'd like to think that most of the time I was able to do that. I'm sure that some of the time I projected my own BS onto other people. Right. But in general, I tried not to because that's what we're trained to do as psychologists. So where it comes in, actually, you're right. In my line of work, for the women to get to where they are, most of them are, I would say, excellence driven, and that excellence driven can slip into perfectionism. And the problem with that is this: it's like that when in the early stages of your career, being a perfectionist can pay off really, really well. You work harder, you work longer hours, your work product, usually early on in your career, the correlation between your work product and what you can achieve is the ratio is pretty good. There comes a point where the amount of work you have to do, the amount of people you're working on, the type of work you have to do is too nebulous to even define what perfection is. And when I have clients who are in that phase of their careers, their perfectionism actually holds them back. They're trying to get things done perfectly. They're working too long. They're working too hard. They don't know how to tell the forest through the trees. So they're focusing on all the small little things and they're getting lost. I mean, it's like business, right? It's like my website. Instead of looking at like, what's the larger picture? What do I need to grow? It certainly wasn't figuring out the perfect hex code for the right shade of blue, right? And the other piece with women in leadership is that not only they often talk about perfectionism in the context of imposter syndrome. And sure, I get it. If I think I need to be perfect and I realize I'm imperfect, then that's going to lead to me having a lot of anxiety about whether I even belong here or fit in. But if we're talking very specifically about leadership, there's also the consequences that perfectionism has on your ability to lead people properly. Because really perfectionistic leaders tend to be micromanagers, which is just soul crushing for the person who's the recipient of that micromanaging. They tend to have unrelenting standards. So they're holding their teams to standards that are really not great. And they're terrible delegators. They're terrible project managers, again, because they can't see forest through trees. They
Mm-hmm.
become miserable people to work with.
Mm-hmm. So what do you do to work with these women who suffer from like this extreme perfectionism?
We one of the things after I help them identify what it is, right? I don't know about you, but I have a ton of perfectionists who they're like, I'm not. I'm like, oh, let's talk about this. Uh, is helping them. It's two pronged. First, helping them understand how that perfectionism drives a ton of anxiety and how it's actually making their life worse. Because if you don't do that, they're never going to move out of that mode. So they have to understand what misery, as opposed, because they're only seeing the benefits. But everybody says, I'm so good at what I do. I've always bought into a job. I've always received compliments about this. But the other day, like this was missed by my team and I caught it. That's all they're focused on. And the other piece is helping them start to make distinctions. We talk about level of execution. So I have my clients look at any project, any work piece, and I'll say, what is the level of execution that is needed for this specific project? Does it need to be excellent, not perfect? Excellent. Or can it be really solid or good enough? All of those things are above average, right? Can't make somebody who's excellence driven aim ever for average. That is failure. And then we'll have them operationalize that. Okay, if we're saying that this is excellent, how will you know it's reached that status of excellence? How do we operationalize what solid looks like? How do we operationalize what good enough looks like? So now they have metrics against which to evaluate the work, but also when they're talking to their teams, they can say, listen, guys, we got a lot of things going on. We need to get this done. The status of execution for this is going to be solid. Here's what we're looking for. And so people now know what to work on, and they can, because they know how to reason through that, they can let go of having everything done excellently.
I love this. I love it all because sometimes I hear a little bit of me in it, right? Like I've learned over the years, I think part of my management has grown because I've learned to be like, it's not the end of the world. This is just a business. We're not saving lives. That's actually how I rationalize it. Somehow that really helped me to be like, it's not, you're not doing surgery. Like, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. It needs to be good enough and just get it out there. But I love just hearing you talk about like breaking it up between excellent, solid, good enough, and then having like metrics. The metrics is key because for people like us who are super driven and or anyone like me, or maybe the woman you teach, it's like those metrics give you something to fall back on and be like, okay, well, this needs to reach A, B, C, D to be this. And that means I can let go of X, Y, Z, whatever. Love that. Love it. So I think I would like to talk briefly about one last thing with Noteworthy, and that is talking. Can you tell me about an instance where you had a really successful experience with a woman that you could coach and you felt like you left it just saying, good. And why was that successful?
Sound full of myself if I say I feel like I have a lot of those.
I just want one that really sticks out and like the methods maybe you used or what you worked with her.
I'm going to do a single session as opposed to, I mean, as an outcome, I could tell you one of my prouder, but not necessarily my proudest moments is starting and working with a client who, at the time I met her, was one of my perfectionists, was a massively high achiever, incredible woman in finance, but in an engineering field. So male dominated squared for that. And just getting her through the initial burnout, the confidence, the loss, getting her to articulate herself and getting her to move out of her organization and very confidently position herself for her first C-suite role. That was great. But when you asked me the question, there's a session I had just yesterday. So I have a new client who's looking for a job, and she's coming into this job search with a lot of the perfectionism, a lot of fear. And she has an interview coming up, which would be for an incredible position. And I was just listening to her talk. At some point, I just stopped her. And I don't always do this, but yesterday I stopped her and I said, I want you to just close your eyes. I want you to tell me what you're feeling, which is guaranteed to bring tears. Um, and we started talking about the fear she had, all the stuff in her head. This is the only opportunity I'm going to get. What if this doesn't? And really went down to being able to identify those, what's driving the anxiety. Because if we don't take that away, it's not just this opportunity, it's every other opportunity she's going to approach with desperation. If there's one thing that makes people run in the other direction, it's desperation. Doesn't matter if it's business or love or anything else. Desperate people are people, I mean, just think of being somebody who's drowning, who's desperate. They will pull you under with them, right? And so being able to work through a session like that, where we're able to combine not only, again, my background as a psychologist to help her understand like what she's coming into this call with, how it's translating then. Now, this is pure coaching, how that is all translating into her demeanor, the quality and the timbre of her voice, the way she wants to answer questions. And then we did a whole interview prep for her, which is like, I was asking her, what's the question you're most scared of answering? Why is that? Let's talk about, tell me about this job. And at the end, one of the things I'm very good at is people will talk. I'm just taking notes and I'll repeat to them what they said. Or they'll give me a difficult scenario and I'll be like, well, okay, but you want to answer this, but how about this? And they're like, how did you say that? I'll say, you said it. You don't even realize you said it. You said it. Right? I just took the words that you said and I took all the fear out of them and I repositioned them and jumbled them a while. And like, this is what you're saying. And to give somebody that power to walk into really challenging situations, which at the executive level, senior executive, especially, these women are facing those kinds of situations on a daily basis. And to show them that it's not that I have something magical. She's like, but you're so confident. I'm like, those are your words. I'm confident because it's not me applying for the job. Put me in your shoes. Maybe my voice would shake. Right? Maybe I would let the self-doubt creep in. That is the advantage of hiring somebody like you, or somebody like me to come in and help, because we can keep that level head. We can hear things differently. That is a microcosm of the kind of impact that we have, where people think they're coming in and they're going to get business strategy, career strategy, skill set to master difficult conversations, a framework for better delegation skills. But you're getting so much deeper than that. And you leave somebody who now not only has, sure, she has a framework, taught her how to address some of these questions. We talked about presence. We talked about authority. Those skills are there. But it's creating the transformation that will allow them to repeatedly apply that, know how to use it, and feel great doing it. And that makes me talk like this, and it makes me look like this, and it makes me feel like I literally feel myself getting warm and glowing, because that's exciting. Like, that's why I do what I do. It is so much fun.
Yeah.
And that's what I want my clients to feel. I want them to walk into work. I talk about success and fulfillment. I don't want them to, all my clients are successful. I don't want them just to be successful. I want them to walk into work, and let's just say 85% of the time, 15 can be crappy stuff that you don't want to do, but have those moments where you're like, gosh, I'm so lucky. Like, today was awesome. This conversation was great. I believe that's possible. Actually, I know it's possible.
I love it. I love hearing stuff like this. It inspires me. It really does. So on that note, though, of fulfillment, how do you, as an entrepreneur making multi-six figures, manage your business and personal life? Like, do you feel like you've achieved some kind of balance, or the push and pull is leveled out a little bit? And do you have any time management techniques that you can share with other women entrepreneurs?
I've not managed it entirely. I'm way better than I used to be. It is very helpful to have to preach to other people best practices on a daily basis, because it keeps you honest. I am so much better than I was when my children were younger. And I don't think it's simply because they're older. I really, I don't believe it. I know that part of it is I have a better understanding of what my priorities are. So one big piece is making sure that we communicate to people outside of our space, so at home, what our priorities are and why things are important to us. because I live in a world where there's, like most women, right? There's a lot of guilt, either
Mhm.
self-imposed or brought on by other people, for investing extra time or energy into things. I work from home now, so I get a lot of, well, but can you go to the bank? Can you go do this? Can you take the kid? I'm like, no, I'm at work. Can you pretend I'm in a completely different office? I am not here. I don't know why you all think I'm here. I'm not. Or the ubiquitous evening call, what's for dinner? Right. But I used to allow those things to really suck me in. I used to just give in. Now I set boundaries. I'm like, I'm in my office. Unless there's an emergency, nothing's happening, or these are priorities for me. So that's really helped. The other thing that's helped incredibly, which I find more difficult to do now that I have a home office as opposed to a physical external office, is uh, ending my day. Right. So not allowing myself to work. I love that when I had external offices. I'm like, it's 4:30. I need to leave.
Mhm.
Um, I so like I don't work on Saturdays ever. I sometimes work on Sundays because it's peaceful. I love what I do. If I won the lottery, I'd continue doing what I do. I just hire a lot more people to do the things I don't like about it. Right. But setting structure to my day where there's a clear start and a clear end, communicating those boundaries with the people in my life, but also the people I work with. I will tell the women I work with, I'm like, after this time, I'm not reachable. On the weekends, I'm not. If you need me, you need to tell me in advance that something really important is happening, because I am not checking my email, my phone, my Slack, or any of those things. The other huge piece, you're talking about productivity, probably the biggest thing I've ever done to make me more effective. I hate the notion of productivity. More effective and efficient at what I do. I have to thank Tim Ferriss for this and his 4 hour work week. The 4 hour work week is impossible. I don't believe in that. But this tip is great, and I teach it to my clients. Your to-do list is never ending. Your to-do list will end the day you die, and you'll have so many things on that list that aren't checked off. So like, just stop trying to get your to-do list done. But what I do in the morning is I'll look at how much time I have that is not taken by appointments or wonderful podcasts or things like that. So non-human facing time. And then I'll look at that to-do list and I'll identify no more than 3 things that I'm going to focus on in the day. And when people hear that, they're like, that's crazy. There are 1,000 things I need to do. What are you talking about? I get my clients to do this. They become so effective. They get so much more done, and they become much more strategic about what's a priority. So, item number one, and this is the Tim Ferriss thing, item number one has to be something where, if for one reason or another, it's the only thing that you get done in that day, at the end of the day, you look back and you're like, oh, that felt really good. I'm so glad I got that done. And then items number 2, possibly 3, are based on how much time you think you're going to have left after item number 1 is taken care of. And of course, your typical prioritization things like urgency, importance, all of those things. When I do that, I get so much more done. And there, every once in a while, is a day where I finish all 3 items in advance, and there's still a lot of time in the day. That's great. I can choose to add more things if I want to. Or I can say, I'm going to go make dinner early and I'll make something fun today instead of the same old boring. Or I'll go take a walk with a friend, or I'll go stare into space. I don't know. That's a favorite thing to do.
Yeah. I've heard that from someone else, not exactly that she says from Tim Ferriss, but she said the only way she's able to move her business forward every day is by identifying the top 3 priorities and doing them. And she always asks herself, what are the top 3 like priorities that's going to move my business forward? It has to
Yep.
be moving it forward in whatever way.
Mhm.
And then she does those. And that's the most important. She does them first thing in the morning if she has the time. And it's a great habit. I sadly kind of fell off that habit. I think I got sick.
I
So
fall
I
off
should
of
go
it all
back
the
to it.
time. I fall off
Okay.
that wagon all the time. And the way I know it is I'll have a day where I actually have very few in-person calls. So the day looms large. And when you see those days on your calendar, you're like,
Oh,
oh, I'm going to get so much
oh
done.
yes.
And the
You get
day
so
ends and
happy.
you're like, I got squat done. Like I got a fraction. What happened? And what happened is I jumped into work and started reactively responding to emails, reactively
Yes.
in Slack, reactively going onto LinkedIn, reactively, and everything's reactive. And I didn't end up actually getting anything really important done. And that's usually my wake up call. I'm like, oh, fell off that wagon again.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. All right. So I want to quickly talk about the issue as, or not issue, but what business owners face all the time, which is making money and spending your business money. You know, you need to make this profit, but you also need to invest back into your business. So what do you recommend to other women entrepreneurs as a really good investment they could do with their business money?
Uh, Hire a great executive assistant.
Awesome.
And not a virtual assistant, right? That and hire a coach, right? Those are the two things. I can't remember if I said this on air. I know I said it off air when you and I were talking initially, but hiring a coach was a game changer for me because it was doing for me what I do for other people, which is bringing an outside perspective and somebody who had expertise in matters I didn't have expertise in, somebody who had more experience with work. The current coach I have is somebody who works on scaling. So I built my business to be in the high five figures, then maybe the low six, and then I hired a coach, and we started multiplying. Like I paid my coach initially was in the six-figure range, but I paid off that investment within 6 months of working with her.
Mm.
Right, like it was done. So one is hire the right coach, take your time, vet people. I spent a lot of money in systems and group things and whatever. I really needed to vet and hire the right coach. But beyond that, an executive assistant.
Okay, so let's talk about hiring a little bit briefly. What are some mistakes you made hiring? How do you find that really good person or people for your team? What advice do you have for women?
So many mistakes made. The first mistake I made was trying to hire cheap. Right?
Mm.
That was a big mistake. So initially, because I didn't have very much money, I'm like, oh, I'm going to get a VA. I'm going to get a foreign VA. Not that I have anything, like I have a few foreign VAs right now, but hiring somebody to have a warm body there instead of taking the time to hire the right person, which brings me to my second mistake, which is hiring without having a clear sense of what are the roles and responsibilities you want somebody to fulfill, like all of them.
Yes.
And vetting those roles and responsibilities with someone. Or just trusting when somebody says, oh, I can do that. Just because somebody thinks they can do it doesn't mean they can't. So I hired a ton over the years of VAs, of people to help me with marketing or other things like that, who were fine. But in the end, the investment was kind of wasted because they weren't invested in my business. They didn't get a sense of what we needed to do. So it was always this having to explain something to someone versus that person becoming more autonomous in the business.
There's always what I like to call these people I've hired in my past, the task takers who just take the tasks and they do them. And then there's the ones who are proactive, who, and I've had this with contractors too. I mean, what am I talking about? I've never hired an employee, but I'm now figuring out how to get those people who can bring the strategy to the table, who can bring a little bit more proactiveness, even if they're a contractor, and say, this is, and like you said, a big difference began when I started really clearly laying out my job description every single, and I even put like percentages, like 60% of your time will probably be doing this. 10% of your time, maybe this, 15% this. And it was like the caliber of people I got was way better. The hiring took longer, but gosh, the mistakes made were a lot less.
Yeah.
And the fit on the team was a lot better.
And then realize we're biased. Like all of us are biased. Sometimes we hire people because we feel bad, because we like them, because like that's not a good reason to hire somebody. You do want to like the people you work with, whether they're contractors or they're W-2, you need to like them, but that's not a good enough reason to hire somebody either. My current program manager started off as a VA, and she was so good at what she did. And there came a point where I said, "You're too good at what you do to find you. There's no way you're enjoying what you're doing now," which was true. And so I asked her, of all the things I'm having you do, what do you love doing? What's fun that you're also good at? And then of all the things I have you doing, what are the things that you can do and you're doing well, but you like there's the kind of soul crushing. And I promised her, which I have over the years, I said, we will eventually get somebody else to do this. So the other mistake I think a lot of people make is they hire somebody and they don't maintain conversations, or they hire somebody as a point person, even a contractor, instead of hiring for longevity. If you hire for longevity, you start having conversations with the people you're bringing onto your team. Understand, what do they do best that they love doing? Try to give them more of that. What do they do really well? It's super helpful to you, but that make them miserable. Over time, start planning to hire somebody to take on those tasks. That's how you're going to retain these people. Pay people well. That's the other thing. My current program manager, who honestly, like, she's nearly like a COO in the background, right? She's my operations person. Every 6 months, every year, we start talking. What is she doing that she's liking? What's working? What's not working? Where does she need help? And I have hired 3 other people to my team to take over work that she at one point was doing. She could do, but that's not her highest value. Not to me, certainly. I've also promoted her from VA to executive assistant, and then she really operated. She knows my business. She cares about my business. To program manager, and I've given her raises. So even in years, last year was a non-growth year. It was the first year since I started back that we didn't grow. A good year. Even on a non-growth year, we made over $250,000, right? Like that. But even in that year, I gave her a raise, and not a 3% raise. The economy didn't move by 3%. I gave her a raise, a real raise, and I told her this year is poised to be much better, and it is. It's already much better. And I said, we will reconsider your pay, because she's worth it. Everything she does excellently is worth it. I would rather reinvest. We was talking about this with a client just yesterday, former client. And I said, I would rather reinvest the money I make into paying the people who are helping me make that money every cent that they're worth than put it in my bank account right now or bring on new projects.
If only more people thought like you. I think I've only had like, I want to say 2 or 3 people on my show who've asked their employees or contractors, like, what do you love to do? And then, and you know what? I think they've all been coaches. So go figure. It's like, So what advice do you have for other women as they scale their own business? And what do you think is holding some women back when they're hitting that plateau and they're so close, but they just aren't breaking it? What advice do you have for them?
One piece of advice is, if you're not scared, you're not scaling big enough.
If you're not scared,
you're not scaling big enough. If it doesn't make you like just a little nervous, you're probably not thinking big enough. So I go back to, I know I've repeated this. I swear, I really genuinely believe this. Hire the right business coach. Because the right business, what my business coach did for me, what the right business coach will do for you is they will get you to do things that feel just a little scary. And they're not doing it because it's fun. They're doing it because they have a model or they have an understanding. It's the same way, ideally, these women do it for their own clients if they're coaches. The same way I tell my clients, like, I will get you to do things that feel uncomfortable because they know that those things pay off. That is a really big one. And the other thing I'd say is, if you find yourself feeling really miserable in something you're doing, take a break. Ask yourself what it is about it that's miserable. You might just need a tweak, or you might need to go back to the drawing board. And if you need to go back to the drawing board, then whatever. It's like we're going to work for decades.
Yeah.
Easier to build something great if, for the most part, you love what you're building.
Yeah, agreed. So this has been a really, really wonderful conversation. I appreciate your time, Alessandra. Can you please tell us where we can find you? If anyone's interested in connecting you, any woman out there is interested in connecting and wants to get in touch, where should they find you?
My website is Noteworthy Inc. So inc.co. So noteworthyinc.co. And then probably one of the best places to find me is on LinkedIn. I am constantly posting on LinkedIn and I'm in there on a daily basis. And it's Dr. Alessandra Wall, one L, two S's. Everybody wants to invert those. And Wall, like the Pink Floyd album, just simple, Wall.
Oh, interesting. I would not think that. Okay. But that's awesome. Thank you. We'll include it on the show in the show notes. What is one philosophy, mantra, or quote you try to run your business by?
Uh, honestly, probably think about what's right for you, not just what's right. That's what started driving my business, and it's how I try to do it. Like, don't just do what people tell you is the right thing to do. Really stop and think about what's right for you.
I don't think I've heard anything like that. Don't just do what people tell you to do. Think about what's right for you.
It's
Yeah.
that. Have you ever heard that? Like, what would you tell your 20-year-old self? Those things. It's
Yeah.
always that. I was very much a good girl. I was the good girl. I did everything that was right. I approached my schooling, my career exactly the way I was told I needed to. And if I'd continued doing that, there's no way I'd be in this business because I, quote unquote, I didn't threw away a PhD
Mm.
to just become a coach.
I think a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with that, with like the degrees they have had and they've gotten, and then like it's something I know I've struggled with it, but it's like something they're in, unrelated to what they got their degree in. And you can always learn something, I guess, from your degree that maybe you can buy. Not everyone, but it's so funny. I've heard a lot about entrepreneurs and a lot of women especially thinking like, man, I just was that worth it? Was it a good choice? Et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
But yeah.
That's it for me. It was the difference. It's really looking at the difference between what's right and what's right for you. That's what I preach to my kids. I'm like, we're going to tell you things that are going to sound right. You got to stop. And you really got to check. Just because it's right doesn't mean it's right for you.
Just because it's right doesn't mean it's right for you. I like it. Well, thank you again for joining me on this interview, Alessandra. I really appreciate it. If you are part of our audience, you're listening to this show and you also enjoyed it, do me a little favor and share it with your friends and family and whoever is interested. So until next time, you can find me on LinkedIn, Kiri Mohan, or tag me on Instagram at the Kiri Mohan if you want to continue this conversation. Thank you, Alessandra, again.
Bye.